Now, without further ado, this workshop today is going to split into 3 sections. Now first, we're going to introduce the NMOS exam. Why is it so important here in Singapore and what are some of its special features? And second of all, we're going to have a careful look at the preparation guide to this NMOS exam, how we can prepare. And then is there anything that we need to keep in mind during our preparation? And lastly, we're going to look at how to study Math Olympiad in general, especially in the early stage, in primary school. What are some common behavior or study issues that most students would have? Now, without further ado, let us start with the first topic, which is the NMOS exam. Now, there are a lot of Math Olympiad contests here in Singapore at the primary level. And does anyone know how many of those? Exactly, there are around 9 Math Olympiad contests here in Singapore. And then here, I have listed them in a table according to their difficulty, how you can register for this Math Olympiad contest, as well as the available grades, some of the special features, and the dates of where they usually take place. Now, one can see that this NMOS exam that we're going to talk about today is slightly easier than the SMOPS and the RI exam, which we know are the 2 most complicated, most difficult Math Olympiad contests here in Singapore. And this is also one way that can get you a very high chance to enter NUSH, which is a very well-known high school or secondary school here in Singapore. And that's why we're so focused on this NMOS exam, especially when you're in primary 5. Because this year, if you are primary 5 this year will be your final chance to earn a prize or get some awards in this NMOS exam that will help you to DSA into NUS high school. Now, with that being said, here's some basic NMOS exam information that we all have to keep in mind. Now, the NMOS exam date for this year for the preliminary round is 27th of June, which is very soon. Today is 19th of May. And for the special round, it will be held on 1st of August. So there's 2 months between preliminary round and special round, around that. And the exam time for both preliminary round as well as the special round are the same, 90 minutes. And for the questions, for preliminary round, there are 30 questions worth total of 60 marks. Now, this 60 marks consist of, from the first question to the 10th question, they're all worth 1 mark. And from the 11th question to the 20th question, they're worth 2 marks. And for the last 10 questions, they're worth a total of 3 marks each. And that's how it adds up to a total of 60 marks. While for the special round, there are only 20 questions, but for the first 10 questions, they'll mark 4 marks. And then for the last 10 questions, each would worth 5 marks. And so that adds up to a total of 90 marks. And usually, the result of this NMOS exam would come out in about 10 working days. And this is something to keep in mind, is that you're not allowed to use calculator in this NMOS exam. And usually, there would be around 5,000 to 6,000 participants every year in this NMOS exam for the preliminary round. Of course, for the special round, some of these students will not be invited to a special round. These are some basic information on this NMOS exam, and I believe this is something that we all keep in mind. Now, what interests us the most, that what we parents and teachers focus on, of course, is the NMOS exam prizes the awards. Now, for the NMOS exam preliminary round, the top scorers will be invited into the special round. And then the final result would combine your results from the preliminary round and your special round results. So if you are not invited to the special round, then you wouldn't be able to get those 90 marks from the special round. Now, this is a rough estimation that our teachers made. For the gold certificates that you are going to receive, there are around 80 recipients every year. For the silver certificates, around 300 recipients. And for the bronze certificates, there are around 600 recipients. Now, combining with the total amount of participants, this would correspond to the top 1.5%. And the silver certificate will correspond to the next 7%, and the bronze certificate next 11.5%. Now, what does this special round mean? Now, this means that if you are able to get into special round, if you are invited to special round, then you can at least guarantee a silver certificate. That's what this bracket means. But that doesn't mean that if you are not invited to the special round, then you wouldn't get silver certificates. There's still a chance for you to get a silver certificate, as it depends on the overall performance of the candidates, of the participants every year. Now, this brings a very interesting question, is there a cutoff point for this NMOS special round? And sadly, the answer is no. Now, this cutoff point for the special round changes from year to year, and it can vary a lot depending on the overall performance of all the participants. As we see, only the first 1.5% and some of the 7% would be invited into special round, so there's no strict cutoff point for the special round. That's something for us to keep in mind. And there's something special about this NMOS exam, is that the top 30 students with the preliminary round and the special round result combined will receive a special medal. And most importantly, the top 20 students in this NMOS exam will be shortlisted to join the IMSO training, which is an international math Olympiad contest throughout globally, so that these students will be able to compete with other math students from other countries. But these 20 students are not all guaranteed to be able to participate in this IMSO contest. Only 12 will actually participate in this contest. So you still need to put in a lot of effort, put in a lot of time for you to earn those 12 places. And that's something we should remember. Now, here are the exam awards of this NMOS exam. Now, with that being said, here I would like to conclude why is this NMOS exam so important and why we should all take part in this NMOS exam. Now, the importance of this NMOS exam includes, first, it will increase your DSA success rate. Now, the DSA is a special pathway here for primary students in Singapore, is that they can use their curriculum results, either it could be Math Olympiad or sports achievement, for them to get into secondary school in a direct manner without going through the primary 6 leaving examination. And with that being said, with the NMOS exam, in particular, it will increase your DSA success rate significantly if you are interested in joining NUSH. As we know, this exam is conducted by the NUSH high school. And beside this, it also gives you a very high chance to get into the national team, as I mentioned earlier, for the IMSO training. So if you are a math lover, if your children is really interested in math, this will be a very good opportunity for him to know other math level students all around the world. And this NMOS exam also gives a very accurate evaluation of your students, of your children's performance. How your children perform in overall all the P5 students. And why is that important? Because all these students taking part in the NMOS exam would most very likely to do the RIPMWC and the SMOPS exam next year when they are in primary 6. So this NMOS exam will provide a very accurate evaluation at where your kid is, its levels among all these P5 students, so that he can prepare before these 2 exams in primary 6. So that's a very good warm-up. Now, this concludes the importance of this NMOS exam, why we should participate and why we should put in a lot of efforts and time. Now, with that being said, the next topic of today is, so how are we going to actually prepare for this NMOS exam? As we all know, it's very important. So here I'm going to give a very detailed step-by-step guide for you to prepare this NMOS exam. Now, this part will be split into 3 parts. First, what are the main key points? What are the topics covered in this NMOS exam? And next, how would this NMOS exam compare to the RIPMWC exam as well as the SMOPS exam? As we know, these 2 exams have just passed recently, and most of the P5 students this year have also participated in these 2 exams as a warm-up. So what are the main difference between them, how we can transition from one to the other? And finally, let's get practical. How are we going to prepare? So, starting with the first topic, what are the main key topics covered in the NMOS exam? Now with this, I have created this table that I have classified all the topics according to different modules: calculation, counting, word problem, geometry, number theory, travel problem, and comprehensive problems. These are the 7 modules, 7 big pillars of the Math Olympiad contest here in Singapore from the year 2007 to 2021. From this table, the most significant thing is that we see that word problem as well as geometry problems consist of 8.5 and 6.9 in this average column, and converted that into percentage, this would constitute of 28% and 23% every year, roughly. So, if your children struggling with these 2 topics, then maybe it's time for him to put in more efforts into revision on these 2 topics, because they would be covered the most in the NMOS preliminary round compared to the other topics. Now, if I will convert this into a pie chart, this would be more obvious. As we see, we have a huge portion comes from geometry problem and a huge portion for the word problem. So these are the 2 big topics that we need to focus when we are preparing NMOS exam. And following that, we have comprehensive problem and calculation problems, which also consist of a huge part in this exam. This is for the preliminary round, and this gives us a big picture of how these topics examined in the preliminary round. Now let's have a look at this special round, which is still far ahead, but of course we can have a look at it. Again, from the year 2007 to the year 2019, we see that we have calculation, counting, word problem, geometry, number theory, travel problem, comprehensive. Again, the 7 big modules, 7 big topics. But this time, we see that Besides the geometry, 20%, and the word problem, 80%. Now, for the special round, this number theory, this topic, also consists of a huge part, which 60% come from the number theory, as well as the comprehensive problem with 15%. And I would also illustrate this with a pie chart. We can see in the special round, these topics are spread out more evenly compared to the preliminary round. Now, the word problem and geometry, of course, will still take a big portion in this special round, but in order for you to prepare your special round, you will also need to put in a lot of efforts into number theory, comprehensive, and calculation topics. So this is something for us to keep in mind. But still, special round is still very far ahead. So for now, we should focus on preparing for our preliminary round. So focusing on the word problem and geometry problems, getting a very good foundation in these two topics is going to significantly help your performance in the NMOS exam. Now, again, with that being said, the next topic for this session is what is the main difference between the NMOS exam and the RI exam, as well as the SMOPS exam, which recently happened in March and April. So let us have a good look into this topic. Now, I'm going to give a very visual comparison for you to have a big picture of how these two competitions compare to each other from two perspectives. First, the range of topics. What are the topics covered, the range, and what are the key points, what are those knowledge that will be put into every question in these two exams. Now, starting with the range of topics for NMOS, you can imagine it like a very wide green field in Australia, and there are many cows, maybe. Because, now, the reason that I give this picture is that this NMOS exam like to cover a broad range of topics, from train problems to river problems. This very small subtopic in the travel problems, it will all be covered in this NMOS exam. Broad range of topic compared to the RI and SMOPS exam, where it will ask very deep questions on each topic, but then it wouldn't involve a lot of topics. For example, for RI, it wouldn't involve train problem in the travel module. It wouldn't involve river problem in the travel module compared to the NMOS. So all these topics in RI, even though there are not a lot of topics, but for each topic, it will examine in a very in-depth manner to really test your understanding, your foundation in this topic. And for the key points, for those knowledge that will be examined in each question, there's still a very subtle comparison between these two exams. Now, starting with the NMOS, I would describe it as a knife set, a kitchen knife set. So, for example, in order to handle a certain ingredient, we can use one type of kitchen knife. And for another type of ingredient, we might use another kitchen knife, another type of kitchen knife. Now, compare this to the NMOS exam. For each question, it will only examine one certain key point. And for another question, it will examine another key point. For each question, just one key point. There wouldn't be multiple key points combining into a certain question. But if you were to compare this with the RI and the SMOPS exam, then I would describe this as a Swiss knife. So imagine that for certain particular questions in RI, it will involve a lot of ideas, a lot of key points, so that you have to have a very good connections between these key points in order for you to solve the problems in RI. So if you are only very good in the geometry problems, and not very good into the word problems, then if we combine these two topics together, then you have a very hard time trying to answering those questions. Compared to NMOS, for each question, it will only ask you to a certain degree of the key points in every module. Now, of course, this is just a visual description of the comparison. In order to get a better picture of what's happening, here's an example. We have these questions from the NMOS exam from the 2016. Now, the figure below shows a rectangle and a square, and given some information, find the length of AD. Now, in order to solve this problem, there's only one trick that we need to use, which is what we call a half model. Simply by connecting this E and C, we'll be able to construct a few half models so that we know the area will be half of the total area. And simply with this key point, we'll be able to solve these entire questions in one go. But if you were to compare this with the RI exam, you'll find that for these questions from this year, 2023, the question 9, as shown in the figure below, given some information and this, find area of ABC. Now, if you're only very good in applying geometry model without any knowledge in the word problems or some certain math ideas, you'll find you are having a very hard time trying to answering this question, because it doesn't involve one or two, it actually involves three key points. First, you have to apply the equal height model from the geometry problem, and a more advanced version of the equal height model we call a bird hat model. That will be a second step to solve this problem. And at the end, it not only examines your knowledge, your foundation in the geometry problems, you also have a very good understanding in the word problem here, the principle of fixed difference. Now this means that if you have a difference between two certain quantities, if you add the same amount or take away the same amount, the difference will never change. The difference is fixed. Now this idea is borrowed from the word problems. So we see that it will borrow some ideas from the word problems, put into geometry problems, and then it will come out in the RI exam. So this is the main difference between the NMOS exams and the RI exam. You only need one key point to solve one problem in NMOS, and you will need to combine multiple key points in order to solve the RI questions. So I hope this gives a very concrete example of what it means of these pictures here. Now, for this question, I've actually recorded a video lesson, especially on this problem, and I'll give a QR code that will link to this video lesson for you. I'll give you some time so that you can take a screenshot and you can scan this QR code to have a look at the video lesson on how to solve this particular question. It's a very interesting question, in fact. Now, with that being said, the next thing is to get practical. So how are we actually going to prepare for this NMOS exam? Now, with all that being said, in these two topics, there are 3 steps in order for you to ace this NMOS exam this year. First, as we see, since each question would only examine a certain key point from a certain module, in order to solve the questions in the NMOS, you will need to make sure that you have a complete body of knowledge. So you didn't miss any key points in your body of knowledge. Because, for example, imagine this. For the knife set example, if you didn't bring a certain knife, kitchen knife, to a cooking contest, then with that, you wouldn't be able to handle a certain type of ingredients. The same applies to this NMOS exam. You need to make sure that you have collected all the kitchen knives before you enter this NMOS exam, so that you will be able to solve different type of questions. And that's why a complete body of knowledge can be very essential when it comes to the NMOS exam. And next, once you have made sure that you have a complete body of knowledge, the next thing you need to do is that develop your mathematical ideas. Because especially for the last 10 questions, those questions, they're worth 3 marks. Just with those methods, with those techniques, with those key points, you're still having a very hard time trying to solve those particular challenging questions at the end, because it sometimes involves some math ideas, some logic, some reasoning behind it. And that's why you also need to develop some mathematical ideas, which I'll elaborate more on these 2 steps in this session. And finally, in order to make these 2 steps concrete, practice makes perfect. Of course, practice, practice, practice. That's the final step to this NMOS exam. So, starting with the first step, how are we going to have a complete body of knowledge? Now, with that, let us first have a look. Why is a complete body of knowledge? It can be very important, can be very helpful. For example, let us have a look at this problem. The teachers are distributing the exercise books of 5 students, but he has distributed all 5 exercise books to the wrong students. How many ways are there for him to distribute all 5 exercise books wrong? Now, if you have learned about all the counting principles, all the counting problems, you will still find a very hard time to solve this type of problem, because it involves a certain type of key point that if you miss it, if you have never been exposed to this idea, you have a very hard time. You need to put in a lot of time and effort in order to solve this with comps and pumps. But if you have get exposed to this idea of inductive reasoning, then you can quickly turn this problem into a very simple problem. Is that starting with just 2 students, we can find how many ways are there. With 3 students, we can find how many ways are there. With 4 students, we can find how many ways are there. And slowly, you'll be able to see that there is actually a pattern lies behind this type of question. Is that for every new student added, you will take 3 times the 2 ways combined from the 2 cases, from the previous 2 cases. And if you added another student, then that will be 4 times the previous 2 cases. So if you have get exposed to this kind of question, this kind of key points before, then when you see this question, then immediately you know I can apply this key point. It's time for me to use a certain type of the kitchen knives, instead of having a hard time to think, how am I going to solve this problem? So that's why a complete body of knowledge makes sure you get exposed to all the key points before you entering the exam venue. Now following that, this is where the NMOS mock test can be very helpful, because as we can see here, the 30 questions that came out in this NMOS mock test that was a week ago held by our Kangaroo study, the format is exactly identical to the real NMOS exam every year. We can see we have a lot of geometry problems, geometry, and a lot of word problems, and word problem. And here are all the knowledge points or the key points in every question, so that it will really test if you have exposed to all these key points before you enter this test. And after this test, you can check which key points you have never get exposed to, so that you can do more revision on it. And we have also provided a personalized report for all the participants in this NMOS mock test, so that they can have a clear understanding on which topics they are missing, where are their weaknesses, where are their strengths, so that they can do revision accordingly. And here let me give an average performance in this NMOS mock test of all the participants this time. We can see the participants this time in the NMOS mock test did very well, in fact extremely well, in the calculation topic as well as the word problem and number theory problems, which can be very impressive. But then, for these counting problems, we can see this would be the part that most students would stumble upon, because some of the P4 students especially might be the first time that they get exposed to the idea of counting principle, counting, complementary counting, or counting by casework. So these are the key points that they might have never get exposed to before they come into this test. But after this test, they would have a very clear understanding on which topic they are missing, so that they can do revision when they get home. And in order to help our participants, all the students that will be participating in the NMOS exam this year, we are going to have a free workshop next week on 26th of May, Friday, at 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m., which would be focusing on counting problems, which is the topic that we find most students are struggling with. Here are some examples of the counting problems that you will see in the NMOS exam. Well, the first one will be consisting of digits, palindrome numbers especially, as well as some coloring methods. How many ways are there to color a certain shape? And there's no registration fee. You can simply register on our app. If you scan this QR code for iOS, and this system if you're using an Android device. So it will link you to download our app so that you can make a free registration on our Kangaroo study app. So we can have a screenshot of this page. This is to help all the participants to get better at counting problems before they're entering the NMOS exam. Now, with that being said, we're going to move on to the next topic. Now, we have seen how to get a complete system of knowledge and its importance. The next thing we need to do is we develop the mathematical ideas for the children, for the students, so that they can solve more challenging questions, especially like I mentioned, the last 10 questions. So let's have a look. I'm going to go through two main math ideas that are covered in our lessons, which in my opinion are the most two important ones. Starting with the first one is the math idea of making use of constant. Now, I come from a physics and math background. I did a double major in university in physics and mathematics. And the idea that I used most often throughout my undergraduate is this idea of making use of constant. For example, a lot of physics problems can be solved once we know the energy is conserved, the momentum is conserved, the angular momentum is conserved, or like the Kirchhoff's law, the current is conserved. And by looking at this conserved quantity, these constant quantities, we would be able to turn a very complicated problem otherwise into a very simple problem. And the same principle applies to math Olympiad problems at the primary level as well. For example, let us have a look at this problem, question 9. As shown below, there are two squares with side length of 10 and 7 respectively. What is the difference between the two shaded areas? Now, if we were to calculate this shaded area minus this shaded area, it will almost be an impossible task, because we only know this side with no knowledge on this side and this side and this side, and on top of that, this is a trapezium. So it's almost impossible to solve this in a straightforward manner. But how can this make use of constant? This idea of make use of constants comes in very handy here, is that, like I said, If we know this is the difference that we are trying to find between two quantities, if we increase them by the same amount, we see that the difference will not change. So why don't we add these blank spaces to this big square and these blank spaces to this small square? So that now we turn this problem to finding the difference between a big square and a small square. That's way more easier than the original problem, isn't it? That's how this idea of making use of constant can be very important. And especially, this type of math ideas will not only apply to a certain topic, to a certain module. For example, this is a geometry problems, but it can also help us to solve a word problem. Now, on an island, there are some cats and dogs. The ratio of cats to dogs is this ratio. And if 21 cats are shipped to this island, the ratio of cats and dogs will become another ratio. How many dogs are there on this island? Well, if you are going to use algebra to solve this problem, of course it's possible, but it will be very trivial. It will be a lot of calculation involved and very time consuming. But again, we can use this idea of making use of constant. Because we know only 21 cats are shipped to this island. This means what is the constant quantity here? There will be the number of the dogs. So we can try to unify the number of dogs in this two ratio so that we can simply, by looking at the ratio, to figure out how many dogs are there. Again, we don't have to apply very advanced technique involving algebra. Sorry, I can see there's one question in the chat. Where is it on the Kangaroo app? I will put the QR code to our Kangaroo study app at the end of this workshop. Is that good? Great. So we can see that this idea of making use of constant can come in very handy, very helpful. It can help us solve a lot of problems from different topics, geometry problems, word problems, and sometimes even travel problems, number theory problems. So this is one of those very important math ideas that we covered in our long-term summer, spring, and winter class. Now, the next math idea that I'm going to introduce is one of my favorites. It's called start simple. Again, it's two simple words, but it's very powerful and comes in very handy. It's simply like this. For a certain type of problems, especially when it comes to math Olympiads, some questions would seem almost impossible to solve. For example, these problems. We have 4 students and they're passing a basketball. And it's starting with A, how many different ways are there to pass this ball back to A? Now, if you're going to draw a tree diagram, you have a lot of branching. And if we are going to use comps and perms, it will get, again, very complicated. But we can always try to turn a very complicated problem into a simple problem. We call this technique, this idea as start simple. Start with a simple example. Now, 5 passings is way too complicated. So let us start simple with just one number of passing. And with that, it will be very easy to find out the total ways of passing. And in this total ways of passing, how many ways to pass to A and how many ways to not pass to A. And step by step, moving on to the number of passing tool, we can fill out this form. And from there, you are going to find a very obvious pattern lying within these numbers that are going to allow you to figure out how many ways of passing to A when we have increased the number of passing to 5. So we don't have to use comps, we don't have to use permutations, we don't have to use tree diagram. This is simply a very reasonable deduction process to help you figure out how many number of passing are there. Now I'll leave this exercise to your children. You can have a try, have a go to this problem using this idea in particular to help you see how powerful is this math idea. And again, this idea does not only comes in handy when it comes to counting problem. It's also going to help you solve a lot of word problems, geometry problems, and especially number theory problems. So these are the two main math ideas that I'm going to put into today's workshop. And of course, there are a lot of wonderful, very genius math ideas that we will cover in our lessons, but with the limited time, I won't be able to go through each of them one by one. But if you'd like to learn more, you can contact me after this workshop. Now, the final step is that we can all agree, practice makes perfect. With the NMOS mock test, you will be very clear on where is your weakness, which part you are performing better compared to those weaknesses, and with that, complete your body of knowledge. That's the first step. And after that, develop your mathematical ideas so that you can solve those challenging questions at the end. And finally, in order to solidify, in order to make all this concrete, practice, practice, practice. Now, here is a suggestion that I will give to all parents and students, is that there's one thing that we all need to avoid, is that we are not blindly practicing. We're not blindly doing the past year papers. Go through 1 year, the other year, and the other year, and then we look if the results improve or not. No, that's not the correct approach. The correct approach is that first, you do some past year papers. But do not worry about the result. Do not worry about the final marking that you get for every past year papers. And instead, focusing on if there are any key points that I have never get exposed to. Have I seen these key points before? Is this something that I have learned before? And if not, take notes and do revision on that. So this first step is that for you to do past year papers, at least for 10 years, to check, to complete your body of knowledge without worrying your final marking. Okay, so no stress when you are doing this past year papers for the first time, because of course we're going to fail a certain years. We're not going to get a very good grade. We're not going to get a very good marks because some of these ideas, some of the key points might be the first time that we get introduced to. But we need to make sure that once I have seen it this time, I'm going to learn it and I'm going to do better in the next time. So once you have done this first step, once you have completed your body of knowledge, the next thing you do is that you redo all those 10 years of past year papers, but this time focusing on those questions that you already got wrong to see if you have really understood all those questions that you couldn't able to solve in the first place. And then check if you are still missing something, okay, without worrying your final marking. So these two steps are for you to complete your body of knowledge and develop your mathematical idea. Now, of course, I know many parents and students have already done this. They have did many past year papers prior to this workshop. Maybe in P4, they are already starting to do a lot of past year papers. But they are not consciously applying these two ideas, completing your body of knowledge and develop your math idea. Now, for the final step is that do the mock test. This serves as a final checking. If you are still missing something, especially when you are doing the exam under an exam atmosphere where it's more intense and there's time limited, time ticking, tick tock, how would it affect your performance? That's also something for you to check as a final checking. So these are the 3 steps for you to practice makes perfect. Now, with that being said, we're coming to the last topic, the last session of today, is that how are we going to study Math Olympiad in general, especially at the primary level. We're going to look at some common study problems that we see on our students. Starting with the first one, I think we can all agree is that they struggle to pay attention. And next, they are not asking effective questions. And finally, the third one is that they have relatively bad writing habits. They are not writing down the steps. They write some steps here, they write some steps there, and then some steps here. No logic at all. And then finally, they are not consciously making conclusion. Now this is the most important thing if you want to ace your Math Olympiad exams. Now again, let us start with the first one. In the classroom, what are we going to do? This would be, now take this as a checklist for your children, if they are doing this or not. If they didn't, remind them. Starting with the first one, in the classroom, listening is always way more important than taking notes. Oh, we all have this experience. For example, when I was in high school, during my math lessons, I will take down notes as the teacher is speaking. And as time goes by, I will suddenly look up and I just couldn't able to catch up with what the teacher is saying, because as I'm writing down the notes, I might be missing something that can be very important that I didn't listen to. And which is why in Kangaroo study, in all our lessons, all our classrooms, when the teacher is speaking, when we are teaching in front, writing on the board, we do not allow our students to hold their pen. They are not allowed to do that. We need to make sure that they put down their pen and then they fully concentrate to me, to the teachers, and they listen to each and every word as I say. And they think as I go. And for the notes, we're going to have a teaching assistant sitting behind, taking down the notes for the students. Now this note will serve as the supplementary materials for the parents and the students if they got home and they would like to do some revision. But the most important thing is that think with the teachers, brainstorm with the teachers, and not taking down the notes, because listening is always way more important than taking notes. And second of all is if your children is digesting the knowledge, or if they are just absorbing the knowledge passively. Now that's a no-no. Because we know in order to apply a certain knowledge that you learned from the classroom, there's a huge gap in between from learning something to actually applying it. And in order to close this gap, the first thing you need to do is that you digest this knowledge yourself. If you can really understood the teacher is speaking, is teaching, if you really understood each and every steps of the teacher's saying, that's something that we should all keep in mind in the classroom. Now, coming to asking questions, we also see a lot of problems on our students. Is that first, they will come to me, they will ask, Teacher Cedric, what is the answer to this question? Or they will just ask, teacher, how to do this question. These type of questions. Now this type of questions is also a big no here in Kangaroo study, because there are two rules that we want our students to follow. Is that before you ask the teachers a certain question, make sure you show your working first. Make sure you tell me what's on your thought. What are you thinking? What is your idea? Do you have any idea? And then from that, I can tell if you are missing something or if you are on the right track, but you're just making clumsy mistake. Instead of just passively asking how to do the question. That's one thing to keep in mind. And the other thing is, ask the why, not the answer. do not simply ask what is the answer. You need to ask why. Why is this? Why is that? How did we get from here to that? These questions are way more important than just the plain answer, because the plain answer is not going to provide you any knowledge at all. So these are the two rules, two rules that you can put on your checklist of whether children are following these two rules. And writing out steps. I think this is the problem that we can all agree, is that some students, or most students, they will write their steps, some here, some there, and a little bit here, and then you just boom, the final answer. And when they come back to the problems, to do some revision, they will have no idea what they are writing. So here are some bad examples. These are the bad examples. Of course, we do not want our students to write their steps like this. Instead, here are some good examples. Something that we should follow, is that starting from the left to the right, from the top to the bottom. Now, some parents would ask me this question, is that they would worry that if they ask the students to write down their steps like this in a very clean and very logical manner, would it mean that they are asking them to strictly following the rules? Will this kill their creativity? The answer is no. Because writing down the steps like this does not mean that they are strictly following the rules. If they can write down their steps like this, it shows that your children have a very clear logic when they are doing this certain type of problem. The thinking process, the reasoning process is very clear, step after step after step, and then how they get to the conclusion. So this does not mean that this process will kill their creativity. Instead, it will help parents and teachers to better understand if the students really understand this topic. So these are the good examples for us to refer to. And again, of course, we all know that we would like our students to write the steps like this, but how? Here are the two tips. Make sure that you ask them to write why leads to what. And finally, explain the why. These are the two rules of thumbs for your children to follow when they are writing down the steps. And if they are following these two rules of thumbs, then to a very high degree, then we can make sure that they will be able to write out the steps in a very logical manner. So these are the two tips for us to take note. And finally, making conclusion. Now we have this one student from our P5 and P6 class lessons, which during the classroom, he or she would never take down any notes. But then when she got back, he would write down the conclusion of every question, a summary, what key points are involved, and this leads to what method on his or her own. And this way, he can help digesting all those knowledge at a very good efficiency. He can make sure that he really understands the key points and what methods to be used at different scenarios. Here are some examples. The questions, the solutions, and a summary. What questions would correspond to what methods? And if you see any keywords, what method do we use? So here's another tip for your children to follow. Is that when they are finishing doing a certain type of question, a particular questions, make sure that they write their own summary, their own conclusion. They need to be consciously doing this. What are the key points of these questions and what method can be used? So the next time he sees this type of question, he can immediately have an idea. Okay, this would be key points and that would be the methods I would be able to apply. So here we have seen the 4 common study problems that we find in primary level students and some even in the secondary school. But finally, there are also some words that I would like to share with our parents. The first is that we learn together with our children, with our students. We try to accompany them on this journey of learning mathematics or any subjects in general. Because only in this way, they will feel like this subject, this thing must be very important. For example, here in Kangaroo study, we always invite parents to sit in with the children into the classroom. The parents will be sit behind the classroom and the students will sit in front. So this way, the students would really care about this class. They'll feel like this must be very important, and that's why my parents are here with me. And they wouldn't feel lonely, as the parents are always there to accompany them. When they feel stressed, when they feel depressed, they will know that parents will always be there. Yes, thank you for the corrections. I can see in the chat. There will also be a teacher at the back. Very good. There will be our teaching assistant. Our teaching assistant will be sitting at the back taking down notes for parents and students. And second of all, be a role model. Now, of course, if you tell your children that do these past year papers to complete your body of knowledge, teacher Cedric say that. And then as he's doing the past year papers, parents just playing with the phone or watching television. Now, of course, that's something we need to avoid. Be a role model. Make sure that you focus on something as they focus on something, so that they feel like, oh, there's someone accompanying along with me on this journey. And with that being said, I would like to quickly wrap up today's workshop with the future planning. Now in May, we have conducted a mock test which have already been passed. And with that, we have a preparation seminar, a physical one compared to this online one, and the review lesson to the mock test. And now we have a sprint class ongoing, focusing on the NMOS preliminary round, and we're going to upload weekly YouTube lessons on NMOS questions, so make sure you follow and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And in June, there will be a mock test. Another mock test, a final mock test before the real NMOS preliminary round this year. So make sure you attend this mock test, participate in this mock test to have a final check-in. And there will also be review lessons for this mock test and more YouTube lessons. And again, this month, June, would be the time for you to do those past year papers. And as I have mentioned, let me remind you that do not blindly doing those past year papers, focusing on completing your body of knowledge. And in July, we have some special round preparation as well as YouTube lessons focusing on the special round questions and past year papers for the special round. This will be a future planning here at the Kangaroo study. And I would like to also take this opportunity to briefly introduce our courses. We provide mathematics courses in spring, summer, autumn, winter throughout the year from primary 1 to secondary 2 for each levels. And there will also be short-term sprint class provided for different events, for different exams. For example, we have a PSLE short-term sprint class in July, the NMOS sprint class, which is ongoing, the RI and the SMOPS sprint class, which have already been ended, but there will be another one next year, as well as the SASMO and SMKC sprint class. And here are some pictures of our teachers. And finally, you can join our studies groups on our WhatsApp, Facebook for P1 to P3, P4 to P6, and secondary school. And for Facebook, we have different group for different level students so that we can provide specialized and targeted materials for different students at different grades. And if you'd like to learn more information, stay tuned to our WeChat, YouTube, Xiaohongshu, TikTok, or Instagram so that you don't miss any event information. And finally, let me go back to the workshop so that you can scan the QR code to download the Kangaroo study app. I'll give 10 seconds for those parents that haven't been able to screenshot this. Okay? Now, so that's it for today. Teacher Cedric, and I hope to see you soon. Bye bye.